Get the car relatively in focus because you can't freeze it fully when your camera's moving, but the background will be completely a blur. Now I do have examples of these here. Probably, look, this one's switched off. Hate when that happens. Now I'm going to see if I can go to this relatively quickly. Now with regards to the blurring photos, really good when we've got the digital cameras because we can test and see our results, and it's probably the best tool for practicing. When I was studying, I'm actually dyslexic, so I always have problems with exposures going the wrong way, up or down. It sort of goes around in my mind. So when I first started studying, I was using film, but they had a digital camera that the school I went to bought for $15,000. It was something very similar to this body, but it was state of the art, and I practiced and I could see what I was doing, where I was going wrong, what I could do to improve. And now that's probably the best thing for us to improve with our composition is with the digital cameras. You do sort of lose a little bit of thinking when you are actually taking photos on the digital camera. Basically we're getting a little bit snap happy in the modern day of photography, where we'll just shoot maybe 600 shots and then we'll edit it later, and maybe out of 600 we might get 2 really good shots, maybe 10 which are okay, and the rest we just end up deleting. One thing that I'm trying to encourage people to do with this class when we get to the composition part of it is to think a little bit more, and one of the most important things to think about is probably actually the lighting, and it's something that we don't even think about even when we were shooting the old film. We don't think too much about the whole lighting side of it. Now I've nearly got to the picture I want. Okay, so those that are close can see this. Basically what I've done is I've tracked a family with their pram. I've basically gone along like this, taken the photo and carried on through. So you can see that the people are quite nicely in focus. They're not sharply focused because, as I said, I am moving and they were moving slightly away from me, not on the same circular plane, but the entire background is blurred. That is one of the things that we can use the shutter speed for, to convey motion in our pictures. Let's see if that's going to flick on through. 6 seconds perhaps. Or you can just look at it for the rest of the class, that's okay. Okay, so you've got the 3 things. You've got your shutter speed. That's probably less important than your f-stop, because whether you realise it or not, the f-stop is the more important thing, where we get the depth of field, which is a little bit more important 9 times out of 10 than stopping movement or what have you. A safe exposure for the average person is f8. If you sit at around about f8, it's what we call the documentary f-stop, where the wedding photographers, the documentary photographers, the war photographers will sit at around about f8. So if I'm focusing on this lady here, then a fair amount of the picture will be in focus in and around it. And that will allow me to use an f-stop, a shutter speed of around about a 1/25th, because if you go any lower than that, then you start to have to worry about camera shake. As a rule, they say most people should be able to handhold a camera at a 60th of a second or lower, unless, like me, you drink too much coffee in the morning and your hand starts to shake, then you want to go a little bit higher up. With the longer the lens, the higher the shutter speed you need, because this thing here, it's a 24-70, which is probably what I use for about 70% of all my photography. And if I'm holding it like this, the slightest movement won't do too much for making the camera blur. But if I've got a 200mm lens, like I was shooting last night at the Tattoo, then hand holding that at 200 meters is an absolute nightmare. You have to use a very, very high shutter speed of around about 2,000, 4,000, just to make sure that you've got a nice sharp picture, because just the slightest movement will cause quite a lot of harm to the overall picture. Okay, so you've got those 3 things that you need to keep in mind. Now, what we do is now we talk in terms of exposure stops. Now a stop, up or down, means that the picture will be either overexposed or underexposed, which will mean that it's too dark or too light. Now with our cameras, we'll have all sorts of numbers of shutter speeds and f-stops. Like you'll have your, for example, your shutter speeds will go 1/25th, 1/60th, 200, 250. Now out of those four numbers, only two of them are a legitimate f-stop. The 1/25th, the 1/60th is not a real f-stop. It's something that the manufacturers put on their cameras just so that we can go in 1/3 increments. The 200 is not a real shutter speed. The 250th is a real shutter speed. So I'm going to take out two of those numbers. I'm just going to go from 1/25th to 250. And then it goes 500th of a second, 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, and so on and so forth. Going back down, it gets a little bit weird, and then it jumps from 1/25th, it goes down to a 60th, and then it halves to a 30th, a 15th, an 8th, a 4th, and so on and so forth, just down there. Now, as I said, handhold down below a 60th is quite tricky. The wider the lens, the easier it is to handhold because you've got less overall camera shake movement with regards to the focal length. I have known one guy that can handhold, he was a shooter, so he was actually able to handhold a 300mm for 2 seconds without any blur whatsoever. And that's because he was a competitive shooter and he trained his breathing to hold something as steady as he was able to. If you're going above 200mm, I encourage you to use a tripod or some sort of a base that you can lock yourself on. Now, a wall is pretty good. If I'm shooting like this, I've got my arms as a mini tripod like this. If I go up against this wall, then I've just locked my body in a little bit more, so it's a lot more stable. If you can wedge it into an edge or somewhere like that, then that's not going to move much at all. So there's your tripod without a tripod. And those of you that tried to sneak tripods in last night to the tattoo, did anyone give it a go? No, almost. You tried? Did they tell you no?
But yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. So a lot of places, a lot of churches won't let you take tripods in, castles, things like the tattoo. Half the reason is they don't want you to damage the surrounding areas, and half of it is they want you to buy their photos, which their professionals have gone in and taken photos of. Okay, so getting back to the whole 3 exposure parts as an accounting ledger, if you adjust one of those 3 things, and you have to adjust either 1 or 2 of the other 3 things to go back the other way. Like if I'm using the Sunny F16 rule, if I don't want to use F16, if I want to narrow the depth of field down and I want to bring it down to f5.6, then I come from f16 to f11, f8, 5.6. So I'm going to bring it down 4 stops. Now I have to take 2 of the other things up 4 stops to make that exposure perfect. So more often than not, I'll probably take the shutter speed up. So I go from 1/25th, I go to 250, 500, 1,000th of a second. So I've taken one down, I've brought the other one up. I can, if I want, take the ISO up from 100 to 200. Then I can take the shutter speed up to 2,000 if I want to make sure that the photograph is exceptionally steady. So you just got to treat that Sunny F16 rule as a nice accounting leisure where you get everything correct. Now what happens when you go outside and you've got a bright sunny day and then you get a little bit of cloud coming over? Then what you do is you bring the whole equation down by 1 stop. So you bring one of them down, say probably you would bring the f-stop down first to maybe the f11. Still perfect. If a bit more cloud comes over, take it down to f8 or even 5.6. If it starts to get dark, then you might take it down a whole 6 stops. Like I'm going to guess inside here. I'm going to see if I can get it right. I'm going to start with my camera on the f16 rule. So I've got 100 ISO. Now everyone that has a manual camera and you're quick at it, you can see if you can beat me to it. Now I'm going to guess inside at the moment. I'm going to guess at about 9 stops under the normal f16 rule. So I'm going to take my ISO up 4 stops. Maybe not, I'll take it a little bit further to 1600 ISO I have that ability, and if anyone else is shooting in RAW, then they can go a lot higher with regards to their ISO, because when they use a RAW file converter like Lightroom or Photoshop, then they can actually take a lot of the noise out of the picture. Now, RAW files is a bit of a tangent I'll get onto if we have a little bit of time near the end of the whole thing. The shutter speed, I'm going to take it all the way down to a 15th of a second, and because I'm able